The story follows an average otaku named Namba Kazu, a guy cursed with terrible luck, who suddenly realizes he has somehow returned to being 17 years old for the third time in his life. As he desperately tries to shield Yui from a mysterious creature from another realm, a question keeps running through his mind. Should he finally reveal the truth to her? And even if he does, would she ever accept such an unbelievable story? Rewinding the events a little, we see our protagonist receiving a kiss from an angel after accomplishing the impossible. He had successfully defeated countless demonic gods, their armies, and even the Demon King himself. The angel congratulates him and explains that thanks to his actions, peace will reign across the world for another 500 years. Hearing that, Kazu finally feels a weight lifted from his shoulders. All the suffering, battles, and sacrifices were not in vain. As a reward, the angel offers him three different paths. He can ascend to heaven, return to life in the fantasy world, or go back to his original world, Earth. Kazu begins thinking about the life he left behind. Back on Earth, he was an exhausted office worker in his 40s, constantly overworked and underpaid. Endless unpaid overtime eventually pushed him to the point of death, leading to his reincarnation in a world of magic and swords. Although he managed to save that fantasy realm, he never truly felt attached to it. Compared to modern Earth, everything there seemed painfully outdated and primitive. But the biggest reason he wants to leave isn't the lack of comfort. It's the memories. The countless deaths he experienced continue to haunt him, making it impossible to find peace. Because of that, Kazu chooses to return to Earth. The angel grants his request, and he starts imagining the life waiting for him. A simple, middle-aged salaryman life doesn't sound so bad anymore. The very first thing he plans to do is march into his workplace and throw his resignation letter directly onto his overweight boss's desk. Then his thoughts shift toward all the anime series he missed during his adventures. The idea of spending every day binge-watching anime fills him with excitement. Before departing, however, he decides to use his magic one final time. After all, he believes those powers will disappear the moment he returns home. He spent years training and refining them solely to defeat the demon gods. Even a tiny portion of that strength could easily turn him into a real-life superhero. Still, he no longer wants anything to do with magic, battles, or saving the world. All he desires now is a quiet and peaceful life. Moments later, Kazu opens his eyes. Instead of a glorious return, he discovers that a football has just smashed directly into his face during school hours. Lying on the school field with blood dripping from his nose, he quickly becomes the target of laughter from several students. The group responsible turns out to be a bunch of bullies. Their leader casually apologizes, claiming he only intended to tap the ball lightly. Seeing Kazu's confused expression, the bully mocks him and asks whether he suddenly forgot who he is. It takes Kazu a few seconds, but eventually he recognizes the guy from his old high school days. Before he can process everything, someone rushes toward him. It is his childhood friend, Shirui Yui. Concerned, she asks if he's okay and immediately pulls out a handkerchief to wipe away the blood running from his nose. Just as she reaches toward him, Kazu softly calls out her name. The unexpected reaction catches Yui off guard. Embarrassed, she accidentally bumps into him and smacks his face once again. At that moment, all of Kazu's memories of her come flooding back. Yui isn't just his childhood friend. She's the daughter of a wealthy company president, the most admired girl in school, and the object of countless students' affection. As Kazu looks at her, he suddenly wonders what became of her after graduation. Strangely, no matter how hard he tries, he can't remember that part of the timeline. It's as if those memories were completely erased. A moment later, Yui asks what kind of problem he has with the bully, Kakagawa. Meanwhile, Kakagawa kicks another football straight toward Kazu's head. This time, however, things go very differently. Without even thinking, Kazu reacts on instinct. He throws a punch and sends the speeding ball flying back. The football crashes directly into Kakagawa's face, instantly knocking him onto the ground with blood pouring from his own nose. Kazu is shocked. His strength shouldn't still exist, neither should his magic. Yui stares at him in complete disbelief and asks what he just did. Wanting proof, Kazu decides to test his abilities. He releases a burst of energy that slices through nearby leaves and sends them scattering through the air like a violent gust of wind. Even after witnessing that, he still isn't fully convinced. So he turns to Yui and asks a simple question. What year is it? Yui gives him a puzzled look and answers that it's 1997. She then asks why he would ask something so obvious. The moment he hears the date, countless memories rush through his head. Classic games like Pac-Man immediately come to mind, along with legendary robot anime that became cultural phenomena. But none of that bothers him as much as one terrifying realization. He has become 17 years old again, for the third time. Kazu begins panicking. After living multiple lives, he starts calculating his total age and realizes that he's probably already over 60 years old, if all his years are combined. Watching him spiral into confusion, Yui wonders if he skipped breakfast and lost his mind. Elsewhere in the human world, a terrifying creature from another dimension appears. One of the monsters known as the Variants, a dark Valkyrie, can be seen licking blood from her victim after brutally taking a human life. Later that same night, our protagonist somehow finds himself floating in outer space, using the powers that should no longer exist. He manages to pull this off by surrounding himself with a compressed air barrier for protection before casting an invisibility spell to avoid being noticed. To escape Earth's gravitational pull, he relies on sheer flight speed and launches himself into space. After reaching orbit, Kazu decides it's finally time to test real magic. Since returning to Earth, the only spells he has used were enhancement-type abilities. Determined to see his limits, he begins pouring enormous amounts of power through his body. The energy surges so violently that his muscles literally start tearing apart from the strain. Without hesitation, he activates healing magic and repairs the damage. The pain, however, remains very real, so Kazu repeats the process over and over, continuously strengthening and rebuilding himself until his body evolves enough to withstand his overwhelming power. Once his training is complete, he shoots forward at ridiculous speed. Like a living meteor, he slams straight into the moon and accidentally blasts chunks from its surface. The moment he realizes what happened, he immediately starts repairing the damage. At that point, one thing becomes crystal clear. His power level is completely unreasonable for Earth, and if he's not careful, he'll cause disasters without even trying. Meanwhile, Yui walks through the city, still unable to understand why Kazu was acting so strangely earlier. Even so, she can't stop herself from smiling when she remembers holding his hand again after such a long time. As she passes a nearby park, memories begin flooding back. It was the place where she first met Kazu. Back then, she had gotten lost and felt completely alone. Kazu had been the one who comforted her. The two spent the entire day playing together, and later got scolded after returning home, covered head to toe in mud. Approaching the same bench they once shared, Yui suddenly stops. Fresh blood is splattered across the seat. Before she can react, the dark Valkyrie from earlier drops down from a streetlight and lands directly in front of her. Startled, Yui immediately turns around. Blood sprays through the air as the monster reveals itself. Far above the planet, where Kazu is still repairing the moon, he suddenly senses that something is wrong. Unknown to him, he had accidentally placed a danger detection spell on Yui earlier. When she helped him up and grabbed his hand, he subconsciously cast the spell out of habit from his previous life. He never intended to do it, nor did he expect it to activate so quickly. Yet the warning is now going off. The instant he feels it, Kazu gathers his power and rockets back toward Earth. Back on the ground, Yui remains unharmed for the moment. The second she sees her opponent clearly, she recognizes it as a dark Valkyrie. The monster seems delighted that its target has practically delivered itself. Without wasting a second, Yui activates the artifact hidden within her stockings. She calls it Gungnir. Even now, she still feels awkward every time she uses it. The artifact is a divine weapon replica capable of amplifying her kicks to incredible levels. Yui rushes forward and unleashes a devastating strike that sends the Valkyrie flying away. Unfortunately, the creature survives. Its twisted neck and broken body snap back into place as if nothing happened. Meanwhile, Kazu continues descending toward Earth. As he gets closer, he notices a powerful magical signature surrounding Yui. That alone confuses him. Magic shouldn't even exist on Earth. Back at the battle, Yui continues pressing the attack. Despite dominating the exchange, none of her blows can finish the enemy. She gradually realizes the terrible truth. This Valkyrie is far stronger than any training target she has ever faced. The gap between their physical abilities is overwhelming. As the creature prepares a counterattack and begins enjoying the fight, Yui quickly changes Gungnir into its rapid combat mode. Blades suddenly erupt from below the Valkyrie and catch it completely by surprise. Meanwhile, Kazu continues racing down from the sky and senses Yui's magical output rising dramatically. Yui immediately takes advantage of the opening. Charging forward, she unleashes her ultimate technique. With a flash, she closes the distance and executes Odin Edge, a divine sword-style attack that slices clean through the enemy and removes its head in a single strike. Sweat runs down her face as she struggles to remain standing. Defeating even one opponent required everything she had. Still, relief begins washing over her now that the battle is finally over. Unfortunately, that relief doesn't last. The strain of using an imperfect divine artifact quickly catches up to her. Just as she lowers her guard, another attack crashes into her and sends her tumbling across the ground. Forcing herself back up, Yui freezes. Three more variants are standing directly in front of her. Fear immediately takes hold. One Valkyrie was already difficult enough. Now there are three. One of them charges forward and smashes her away effortlessly. The creatures laugh while mocking the helpless girl sprawled on the ground. Then, at last, Kazu arrives. He lands right in the center of the battlefield. Stepping between Yui and the monsters, he stands protectively in front of her. Tears begin forming in Yui's eyes as she looks up at him. Trying to understand what he's seeing, Kazu casually asks whether he's interrupting some kind of cosplay gathering. One of the Valkyries becomes furious. Annoyed that her entertainment has been interrupted by a random boy falling from the sky, she attacks immediately. Yui screams Kazu's name, but before the monster can complete her strike, Kazu fires a devastating blast. Then he instantly closes the distance and thrusts his hand straight through her chest. He only wanted to check whether the creature possessed a heart. Instead, the organ crumbles into dust the moment he grabs it. Yui watches in absolute disbelief. A variant's body is tougher than military weaponry, yet Kazu just pierced one barehanded. As he casually relaxes afterward, Yui yells at him, reminding him that the other Valkyries are still alive. Kazu remains completely unfazed. Smiling calmly, he snaps one Valkyrie's weapon apart and keeps a fragment in his hand. The next instant, he vanishes. Moments later, the weapon fragment itself disintegrates into dust. Using that dust-like energy, Kazu completely wipes out the remaining Valkyries as though they never existed. Afterward, he turns toward Yui and asks what exactly those creatures are. Yui immediately responds with a question of her own. Who is he really? The story then returns to the present. Kazu hesitates, wondering whether he should finally reveal the truth. After a brief silence, he decides to tell her everything. He explains that, although he is still the same Kazu she knows, he once died, was reborn in another world, and has now somehow returned to Earth. The following morning, his younger sister Futaba calls him downstairs for breakfast. When he doesn't answer, she storms to his room while yelling at him like usual. The moment she opens the door, however, she freezes. For the first time in her life, her useless brother is already awake, fully dressed, and prepared for school. She stares for several seconds, struggling to process the impossible sight. Finally, she snaps out of it and angrily tells him to answer when he's awake. Her confusion only grows when she realizes her chronically late brother is suddenly acting responsible. Then Kazu drops another bombshell. Starting tomorrow, he plans to make breakfast himself like a proper older brother. Futaba immediately grabs him and starts shaking him in disbelief. According to her, there's no universe where someone as hopeless as Kazu can cook. Kazu only confuses her further by pointing out that he survived on his own for 2 decades. Then he catches her off guard with an affectionate head pat. He gently tells her that they're family and should take better care of each other. Later that day, Kazu arrives late to meet Yui. There, she reveals something horrifying. Anyone consumed by a variant slowly disappears from the world itself. After explaining this, she asks whether he remembers his parents. Kazu answers yes without hesitation, but then he suddenly realizes something disturbing. He can barely remember any details about them at all. Panic begins creeping in as he wonders whether he might have already been affected by a variant. Yui quickly apologizes for upsetting him. She explains that she desperately needs his power because her greatest goal is revenge against the creatures. Hearing the pain in her voice triggers a flood of memories from Kazu's previous life. But the memory he sees isn't pleasant. He sees Yui's lifeless body lying on the ground. The image sends a chill through him. Determined to prevent that future, he promises to fight alongside her. The next day at school, Kazu realizes he may have committed himself to something he barely understands. The truth is that he still knows almost nothing about variants. At that moment, Yui approaches from behind and casually invites him to have lunch with her. Surprised, Kazu asks why she's suddenly spending so much time with him. Blushing slightly, she reminds him of his promise to stay by her side and fight together. After teasing him for acting clueless, she explains that sticking together at school will make things easier. Of course, the arrangement attracts plenty of jealous stares from everyone around them. Later on the rooftop, Yui begins explaining artifacts in greater detail. She reveals that replicas can be created from the remains of defeated variants. These weapons represent humanity's best chance against the monsters. However, only certain individuals possess the compatibility required to use them. Just as she is explaining the requirements, Kakagawa suddenly appears and interrupts the conversation. Complaining loudly, he says it's ridiculous that Yui rejected a top-tier guy like him in favor of someone who apparently suffers from a severe lack of main character energy. The guy confidently tells Yui that he'll make every second she spends with him unforgettable. Even after Yui warns him that her family strictly forbids her from dating, the creep ignores her completely and grabs her arm. The moment Kazu sees that, his hand moves on instinct. A chopstick shoots across the room like a guided missile and smacks Kakagawa directly in the forehead. Naturally, the guy explodes with rage. He grabs Kazu by the collar and demands to know what Yui could possibly see in someone like him. Then he challenges Kazu to settle things properly. Before long, the two find themselves standing inside the dojo with wooden swords in hand. Kazu can't help wondering how his day somehow turned into this ridiculous situation. Meanwhile, Kakagawa confidently tells him to wear a helmet unless he wants his skull cracked open. Kazu immediately points out that his opponent isn't wearing one either. The response comes with a smug grin. According to Kakagawa, someone with a black belt doesn't need protection against a weakling. Around them, a crowd of girls cheers enthusiastically for their favorite athlete. Kazu looks around and wonders if they genuinely came just to watch him get destroyed. Kakagawa then lays out the stakes. If Kazu loses, he must stay away from Yui forever. Before Kazu can even respond, the jock charges forward with a powerful downward strike. The attack misses completely. Kazu casually steps aside, surprising even Kakagawa. The fight continues as Kazu effortlessly avoids every swing. While observing his opponent, he notices something troubling. Every strike is aimed at dangerous areas, rather than scoring points. The guy isn't holding back at all. Then Kazu finally responds. A single strike lands against Kakagawa's side. The loud impact echoes throughout the dojo. For a moment, complete silence fills the room. Neither Kakagawa nor his supporters can believe what just happened. Humiliated, the black belt completely loses his composure. He shouts that he's done playing around. Unfortunately for him, things only get worse. Kazu slips past another attack and brings his sword down with a crushing overhead blow that instantly ends the match. Elsewhere, a bird rushes through the sky carrying an urgent report. Its destination is none other than the Lord of Thunder himself. Unfortunately, the Thunder God is suffering through a massive hangover. Annoyed by the bird's constant noise, he demands an explanation. The messenger quickly reports that 3 dark Valkyries have been defeated by humans. The moment Thor hears those words, his mood changes instantly. He throws aside his drink and stands up with excitement. Something interesting is finally happening. Back on Earth, Kazu watches Yui train inside the practice hall. She performs a series of impressive martial arts techniques before finishing with an energy blast imitation, purely for dramatic effect. Proud of herself, she asks Kazu for his opinion. His answer immediately annoys her. According to him, she's only around the level of a skilled athlete. Yui protests the harsh evaluation. Kazu calmly explains that her body simply isn't strong enough yet. To properly handle magic, she needs to strengthen herself beyond normal human limits. Yui argues that focusing only on muscles would turn her into a brute. Kazu counters by saying he isn't talking about size, but density. Then he reveals a special pill. The medicine contains magic similar to his own and forcibly strengthens the body by repeatedly tearing muscle fibers apart. Without hesitation, Yui accepts it. The confidence lasts about 3 seconds. The moment she swallows the pill, she collapses onto the floor in agony. Later, stories about Kazu's victory spread throughout the school. Outside the nurse's office, Kakagawa's admirers gather in concern. One particularly clueless blonde insists their beloved prince merely slipped and bumped his head. According to her, the injury definitely wasn't caused by Kazu smashing a practice sword into his skull. Inside the room, Kakagawa himself keeps replaying the duel in his mind. He can't understand how Kazu moves so quickly. While resting, a girl enters and offers to take care of him. Even during the intimate moment, his thoughts remain focused on Yui. The desire to possess her grows darker and darker. Then something begins changing inside him. His body twists unnaturally. Moments later, he starts transforming into a variant. Back at the training hall, Kazu sits quietly in meditation. Suddenly, he senses a strange magical disturbance. At the same time, Yui desperately cries for help while suffering from the effects of the training pill. Kazu immediately realizes he completely forgot about her. Embarrassed, he apologizes and places a hand on her shoulder. Healing magic flows into her body. The sensation overwhelms Yui. With a red face, she admits the experience feels so good that it could become addictive. Afterward, Kazu explains that if she can survive the pain for an entire week, her body will become capable of supporting magical power much more efficiently. Yui responds by pointing out that his training methods sound suspiciously like torture. Ignoring the complaint, Kazu asks her to test Gungnir against one of the practice dummies. Yui summons the artifact. To her surprise, the strain of activating it feels much lighter than before. Kazu explains that her physical conditioning is finally producing results. Encouraged, Yui unleashes a full power strike. The dummy explodes apart instantly. She stares in disbelief. The strongest training dummy her family owned has just been destroyed. Even more shocking, her body doesn't hurt afterward. Excited, she looks toward Kazu expecting praise. Instead, his expression becomes serious. He tells her to stop using Gungnir for a while. Confused, Yui asks why. Kazu explains that the artifact was designed without any concern for the user's safety. The longer she relies on it, the more damage it will inflict on her body from within. The answer visibly disappoints her. When Kazu asks why her family would entrust such a dangerous item to her, Yui reveals the truth. Her father personally gave it to her. She explains that her father's company works closely with anti-variant organizations. Because she inherited compatibility with artifacts, just like her mother, she became one of the few people capable of using them. Hearing that, Kazu quickly reaches a conclusion. Her father essentially placed all his ambitions and expectations onto her shoulders. Although he wishes he could solve the problem immediately, he still insists she avoid using Gungnir. Yui becomes frustrated. Without the artifact, she can't fight. Kazu repeats that he's only asking her to stop temporarily. Then, without warning, he grabs her legs. Yui nearly short-circuits from embarrassment and demands to know what he's doing. Meanwhile, Kazu is completely focused on analyzing the artifact's magical circuitry. After examining it, he discovers a way to regulate its output and dramatically reduce the burden placed on the user. Just as he reaches that realization, the front entrance explodes open. A variant has arrived. Yui's eyes widen when she recognizes the figure. It's Kakagawa. But any relief disappears immediately. He's carrying a girl's severed head. Kazu tries to remember who the victim is. No matter how hard he focuses, the memory refuses to surface. Just like before, his thoughts become strangely blurred whenever a variant is nearby. Sensing something unusual, he asks Yui whether variants use humans as vessels. She explains that her family only knows fragments of information. As far as they're aware, variants originate from another dimension and feed on humans. Before the conversation can continue, Kakagawa casually throws the head toward them. Kazu steps forward. With one precise use of magic, the object is instantly destroyed. He positions himself in front of Yui and tells her to stay behind him. Drawing his makeshift magical sword, he prepares for battle. The variant suddenly begins screaming. Its body melts, twists, and reshapes itself into something completely different. To everyone's surprise, the grotesque mass transforms into the image of the Lord of Thunder. The first thing he does is complain that the doorway was too small. Then he notices the person responsible for killing 3 Valkyries. Immediately, he bursts into laughter. Yui nervously asks whether Kazu has ever seen a monster this intelligent. Kazu answers with a warning. A creature with that level of intelligence is likely just as dangerous physically. He then asks whether the door Thor mentioned is connected to the method variants used to enter Earth. Thor completely ignores the question. Instead, he proudly introduces himself as the one true Lord of Thunder. A giant hammer appears in his hand. The next instant, he slams it into the ground. Lightning erupts across the area. Kazu blocks the attack and casually wonders whether Thor is naturally this loud or simply hard of hearing. Thor finds the reaction fascinating. Very few beings can deflect his attacks without injury. Still trying to understand what happened, Yui asks Kazu for an explanation. Kazu casually summarizes the event by saying that the giant thunder guy smashed the floor and created an enormous shockwave. Thor laughs loudly. Addressing a divine ruler so casually should be disrespectful. Yet instead of getting angry, he finds Kazu entertaining. The name Thor catches Kazu's attention. He starts wondering whether this guy is actually connected to the legendary figure from Norse mythology. Yui, meanwhile, grows increasingly worried. This Thunderlord clearly doesn't resemble an ordinary variant. She's already dreading the explanation she'll have to give her family. Deciding that information is more important than fighting, Kazu attempts to question him further. Thor dismisses the idea of being interrogated by a human. Instead, he launches another attack. Leaping high into the air, he gathers an absurd amount of magical energy before descending with a devastating technique known as the Thunderlord jump kick. For a brief moment, Kazu gets distracted, trying to remember which anime used a move exactly like this. Then reality returns. Using a strange whip-like weapon, he blocks the attack. Thor's grin widens. He's beginning to wonder whether Kazu is actually human. Even in ancient times, very few warriors could stop that kind of strike. Perhaps, Thor jokes, he simply didn't put enough power into it. Meanwhile, Kazu starts suspecting that Thor's appearance may somehow be connected to Kakagawa. Eventually, Thor agrees to answer questions. Not because he feels obligated to, because talking while fighting sounds fun. As the battle continues, Kazu asks whether Thor entered the human world by possessing a human host. Thor throws another kick. Kazu avoids it cleanly. Then Thor casually confirms the answer. Yes. Thor explains that beings like gods and lords have lost most of their influence over the human world. Back in the age of myths, their existence alone could shake entire civilizations, but those days are long gone. He goes on to reveal that, at some point, they discovered a loophole. By using humans as gateways, they could slip into the mortal world without paying any significant price. As the battle continues, Kazu asks how an ordinary person could possibly summon a full-fledged deity through magic. Thor immediately dismisses the idea. According to him, humans should never be capable of accomplishing something like that. However, he admits there are many things even they don't understand. No one knows exactly when it began, where it started, or what caused it. One thing remains certain, though. The craving for human flesh is real. Thor explains that many variants eventually lose themselves to that hunger. Once it takes over completely, they become little more than mindless monsters driven by instinct. Higher-ranked beings like him, however, can still maintain control. Kazu follows up with a simple question. Could Thor stop feeding on humans? Thor answers honestly, no. That response is all Kazu needs. He immediately decides the Thunderlord has to be eliminated. Rather than feeling threatened, Thor becomes excited. The killing intent pouring from Kazu reminds him of Odin himself. Listening carefully, Kazu pieces together an important clue. These creatures apparently cannot freely choose when they enter the human world. Having learned everything he needs, he shifts his focus entirely toward ending the fight. Thor announces that he is finally getting serious. His magical power erupts outward. Even Yui can sense the sudden increase. Watching calmly, Kazu comments that the Thunderlord appears to be going all out. Thor charges forward with a technique known as Thunderlord Pursuit. The attack never reaches its target. Kazu's blade cuts cleanly through him. The Thunderlord's body splits apart and crashes to the ground. Oddly enough, Thor doesn't seem angry. Instead, he looks satisfied. He admits he enjoyed the battle and hopes they'll cross paths again someday. After finishing the fight, Kazu turns toward Yui. He confesses that he never expected variants to enter the world by using humans as vessels or gateways. Another mystery bothers him even more. Both Kakagawa and the girl he murdered are gradually fading from his memories. It's almost as though they never existed. At that moment, members of Yui's family's security team arrive looking for her. Yui immediately panics. If her family discovers what Kazu is capable of, things could become complicated very quickly. Kazu simply waves goodbye before taking off into the sky. As he flies away, his thoughts drift toward the future. If he keeps defeating variants, could he rewrite fate itself? Could he prevent the terrible future where Yui dies? Elsewhere, a group of variants receives news of Thor's defeat. The information leaves them confused. Thor had only recently arrived on Earth, yet his presence has already vanished. While one variant casually devours human flesh, the others debate whether a relic user managed to kill him. Moments later, the conversation somehow shifts toward cafeteria management and food supplies. Later that night, Kazu dreams of the final battle from his previous life. He sees himself standing before the demon deity. The dream abruptly ends when Yui calls out to him. She complains that he skipped class just to sleep in such a bizarre location. After spending ages searching for him, she's clearly irritated. As Kazu stands up, he wonders if his recent overuse of magic is causing these dreams. Only 2 weeks have passed since his return, yet memories of the fantasy world already feel distant. Yui then hands him an old mobile phone. The moment he sees it, he instinctively comments on how nostalgic it feels. Yui gives him a puzzled look. Realizing his mistake, Kazu quickly makes up an excuse. Smiling, she tells him to keep it. That way, they can stay in contact through messages and email. Kazu pretends to be amazed. After all, this technology should still be relatively new for the era he has returned to. Once they exchange contact information, Kazu decides to experiment. Using the phone as a focus, he combines it with his electrical manipulation magic and creates a crude detection device. Activating it, he begins searching for magical signals. At the same time, elsewhere in the city, a young couple wanders into an abandoned building. Unfortunately, they stumble upon a variant. The creature captures the girl and drags her away toward what the variants call their cafeteria. The moment that happens, Kazu's detector reacts. 3 variant signatures appear nearby. Without hesitation, he scoops Yui into his arms and begins racing across rooftops. Using giant leaps, he follows the signal. When they finally arrive, Kazu immediately notices a foul scent in the air. Yui's expression hardens. She swears she will never forgive these monsters. Suddenly, a female variant lunges toward her. Yui reacts instantly. She blocks the attack and sends the creature flying with a powerful kick. The variant rises again, grinning wildly with blood covering her mouth. Yui steps forward. She tells Kazu that she'll handle this one herself. Activating her artifact, she unleashes a technique called Horn of Assault. A powerful blast tears through the variant and destroys it instantly. Kazu praises her performance. Unfortunately, the fight isn't over. 2 additional variants emerge from the shadows. Something immediately feels wrong. These creatures seem far more intelligent than the others. Their apparent leader, Locke, transforms into his true form while complaining about the effort required to establish their cafeteria. Yui demands to know what happened to the missing people. Locke responds by casually holding up a severed arm. He explains that Ratatosk's group already finished eating the rest. Fury takes over. Yui rushes forward to attack. The instant she moves, Kazu senses danger. He shouts for her to stop. Too late. A spell called Wall of the End activates and traps her. Reacting immediately, Kazu shatters the spell and pulls her out before it can finish. He orders her to stay back. This opponent is far beyond her current level. Locke appears impressed. The spell had already activated, yet Kazu still managed to interfere. Curious, he asks whether they were responsible for sending Thor back. Nearby, another variant named Susanoo warns Locke to be careful. Locke ignores him completely and acts as though he's in charge. Then he draws a flashy sword and activates a skill known as Ring of Envery. The blade slices through Kazu. Unlike ordinary attacks, this weapon is specifically designed to target living beings. Locke proudly announces that the curse should be powerful enough to immobilize even a giant Fenrir. His confidence lasts only a few seconds. Kazu stands back up completely unharmed. To him, it was nothing more than a simple status effect. During his previous life, he developed countermeasures for practically every curse imaginable. Locke's expression changes immediately. A single strike from Kazu ends the battle. As his body fades away, Locke bitterly mutters that nobody ever warned him humans like this existed. Before Kazu can relax, Susanoo begins laughing. According to him, Kazu looks less like a human and more like a wizard from a fantasy story. The next instant, he vanishes. Before Kazu can react, Susanoo appears directly in front of him and slams him into the ground. After recovering, Kazu realizes something alarming. That wasn't speed. For a brief moment, Susanoo completely disappeared. Across all his years of experience with magic, one thing had always remained impossible: teleportation. Kazu immediately asks about the ability. Instead of answering, Susanoo compliments him for surviving his ultimate divine technique, Absolute Realm. Hearing the name, Kazu can't help commenting that it sounds like something invented after consuming way too much nonsense media. Yui tilts her head in confusion. She has absolutely no idea what he's talking about. Only then does Kazu remember he's living in the past. Refocusing, he warns Susanoo that he'll regret making an enemy out of him and demands answers. Before the conversation can continue, an assistant standing beside Susanoo interrupts. She informs him that a certain important individual is calling for him. Kazu's eyes widen. The entire time, another person had been standing nearby, yet he never sensed their presence at all. Susanoo casually announces they'll continue their conversation another day. Then, just like before, he disappears using that mysterious movement technique. Watching him leave, Kazu remains unusually quiet. Yui notices his expression and asks what's wrong. He asks her to confirm the name. Was that really Susanoo? When she says yes, Kazu's thoughts immediately begin racing. Susanoo is a deity from Japanese mythology. If that's true, then the variants might be connected to ancient legends themselves. There's another issue too. The strange memory loss happened again. Just like every previous encounter, the moment Susanoo used Absolute Realm, gaps appeared in Kazu's recollection. The next morning, Kazu drags himself towards school looking exhausted. Futaba notices immediately and asks whether he's sick. When he insists he's perfectly fine, she develops her own theory. Clearly, he stayed up all night playing games. Then she gets jealous and complains that she wants to play too. Before the argument can continue, Yui spots him from a distance. The siblings part ways. After meeting up with him, Yui explains that her family investigated the group they fought earlier. Unfortunately, they found absolutely nothing. What they do know is that their organization has extensive information regarding Nordic variants. Japanese variants, however, remain almost completely unexplored territory. That leaves Kazu frustrated. His detection magic doesn't work properly on them. If he wants answers, he'll need assistance from someone who actually specializes in Japanese variants. The very next day, a substitute teacher arrives at school. He calmly introduces himself as the new instructor for Japanese literature. The moment Kazu and Yui see him, both freeze. The resemblance is impossible to ignore. The teacher looks far too similar to the cunning variant they encountered before. Introducing himself as Narayama, he invites the class to ask questions. Meanwhile, Kazu silently studies the man, desperately trying to figure out what game he's really playing.